But everybody, thanks so much for listening. We have Professor Richard Wolff on. He's a legend and he's telling the truth. He's been telling the truth his whole life about what's going on as far as the American economy. Professor Wolff, thanks so much for coming on all the time and really talking to the listeners about what's going on right now.
My pleasure, Bob. Glad to do it.
So, Professor Wolff, let's go into this firstly. We are seeing a lot of foreclosures around right now. It's being finally written about. I know the Biden administration is not admitting that there's a recession about to happen, could be even worse. I'll let you tell the viewers about that. But what is your take on the economic issues in our country right now? It looks like it's going to go into a recession, maybe even a depression.
Yeah, well, I wish I had better news. I wish I had more upbeat news. But if you want better news and upbeat news, listen to the president, listen to the people in Washington, at least most of them, or watch television. I'm assuming you want me to tell you what I think is actually going on. So let me do that. We are coming off of three of the worst years of economic problem in our country's history. If you count together the year 2020, 2021, and now 2022, we've had the worst public health disaster in our country's history, with over 1 million fellow Americans dead. Mm-hmm. We've had the second worst economic crash. Now we've had a terrible inflation for the last year, and we have a government that is intentionally, I want to underscore that, leading us into a recession by raising interest rates as a cure, they hope, for the inflation. Public health disaster, economic crash, inflation, recession. I mean, this is a crazy set of burdens to put on a population. Even worse if they're all crammed into 2.5 years, which is what we're talking about, and all happening pretty much or close to at the same time. So it's a failure. I mean, a system that works this way is a system that isn't working. If your refrigerator keeps everything at 80 degrees, and when you open the door, it's too dark to see, and when you reach for an ice cube, it throws them in your face, you'd figure out that maybe here or there something went wrong, but this is a complete failure. This is the time when you call in the refrigerator repair people, and you don't discuss about another fix, you discuss about another refrigerator, because things have gotten out of hand. And now the worst of it in a way, you have changed America over the last 30 or 40 years. If anyone's been paying attention, they know. And the way to describe this change is as follows. We have had a massive redistribution of wealth and income from the bottom and the middle to the very top. Just a few statistics to drive it home. In the 60s and 70s, the average CEO of a major American corporation got between 40 and 50 times the average wage or salary of an employee. Today, that ratio is 300 or 350 to 1. Completely crazy. We had very rich people in the 1960s and 70s, but we didn't have Jeffrey Bezos, and we didn't have Elon Musk. We didn't have people with, and I'm not exaggerating, hundreds of billions of dollars, so that they can shift the whole way the country is going, because they had literally, Jeffrey Bezos buys the Washington Post, arguably the most important newspaper in the country. Elon Musk is running 10 different companies, is busily negotiating with the president of China and the president of the United States. I mean, it makes a joke out of the notion we're all equal here in the United States. We're not, and we're not even close. And here's the problem. If you take a working class, it's the majority in this country. And what you've done is you've made them relatively poorer compared to the 1% or the 5% at the top. You've been doing it for decades, and then you cap it off with a public health disaster, a crash, an inflation, and a recession, and you are bringing people to the edge of what they can tolerate. Now, you mentioned a moment ago, Bob, evictions all over the place. That's right. The New York Federal Reserve released a report yesterday indicating that Americans' savings rates are collapsing and that they're borrowing money like there's no tomorrow, because they have to pay these high prices, all the rest of it. So they're maxing out credit cards. I mean, here's a simple number. In the last quarter, that's just the months of April, May, and June of this year, Americans opened 233 million new credit card accounts. I mean, that's not much less than one per person. And we know how many credit cards people already have. This is additional so that they can rack up even more. I mean, I've been around a long time.
Yeah.
I have never seen the American economy in the levels of multiple difficulties, one layered on top of the other. And I don't see really a way out. What I do see is people freaking out in a variety of ways, doing things that make no sense to me. I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but little things. The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. Okay.
Oh, God.
We have all these problems in the United States. She's got to go 10,000 miles across the world to the other end of the world and poke her finger in the eyes of the Chinese. What is this?
I don't know.
You know what?
But where is Biden in that, in that
He's
issue?
sick.
Why is Biden, the president of the United States, not pulling her back and saying, hey, listen, I'm the president, not you. I don't want you there. He told her not to go, and it's like he's not even there. Well, realistically, it's President Mansion, but I'll let you continue.
Yeah. I mean, here's my fear that Mr. Biden or his advisors, who's ever making the decisions, I don't know at that level. I'm not involved in that, but they kind of want to poke the Chinese, just like they want to poke the Russians by sending equipment to the poor people of Ukraine. The United States is going to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. I mean, these are desperate acts. Whatever you think, I don't like Mr. Putin either, but this is, again, thousands of miles away. In no way on earth does it affect the security of the United States. Neither the Ukraine nor Russia want any problem with the United States, which they've made clear. They have disagreements. I'm assuming there's good and bad on both sides. But what are we doing? What are we doing spending tens of billions of dollars not to help people who are homeless? I do this for a living. So I read yesterday the report of the public advocate. That's an elected position here in New York City. And the guy who won that election, a man named Jermaine Williams. Right. So he issued a report yesterday. So in the city of New York alone, they estimate, based on their work, 80,000 homeless people. Okay? Many of them families, so that you have mother, father, and children. Okay? The shelter system was set up years ago in New York as a temporary solution, right? So you don't have to sleep on the street with all of that implies. We will open shelters Some of them are in schools, some of them are in churches, all of that. But they were supposed to be for a few days. So imagine what goes through my mind as I read in the report yesterday that the average number of days a family stays in a shelter in New York was 500. In other words, a year and a half, roughly. A year. What?
Crazy.
I mean, and this is 80,000 people. It's a kind of horror show. These are people who can't, they can't really look for a job. They're living hand to mouth. The school system is full of reports that children who are living in shelters don't have a place to do their homework, don't have a quiet corner. You are creating stunted lives. 80,000. Now multiply that by all the cities in this country that have homeless problems. We're talking about millions of, and what are we doing? Nothing.
Yeah.
We're not solving the problem. We have the money, but we are fighting a war in Ukraine, and we are, sending our leaders 10,000 miles away to irritate the Chinese. I mean, I find this upside down, and it beginning to feel like I'm in an economy. All economies have problems.
Yeah.
But we seem to have an economy that not only has problems, but has an utter incapacity to identify them, to focus on them, and to solve them.
Well, it seems like they want to go back to medieval times as far as there's no middle class. It's just the serfs, the peasants, it's going into that, economic system again. And that's what it seems like they want. My question to you is how do people survive this? Middle class people that are being decimated right now. You talked about the credit cards. We talked about the foreclosure crisis that's about to really erupt. It's already starting. What's going to happen with all this for the regular working American?
Well, I think well, let me put it differently.
Sure.
I don't know if you caught it a few days ago. A memorandum that had been written by an economic advisor to the head of the Bank of America got leaked. And so I think either Intercept or Politico or one of those got it somehow, however they got it, I don't know. And so it was printed everywhere, and I read it. And there is an economist like me explaining that the way they've got to deal with this, inflation, they've got to make it worthwhile for companies to stop jacking up their prices. I'm an economics professor. I have to explain to people an inflation is when prices go up. Okay. Mm-hmm. Step 2, who sets prices in our country? And the answer is employers, the people who own and operate stores, factories, and offices. The employers get together and decide what the price is. If you've ever been an employee someplace, here's what you've noticed. No one ever called you into a meeting to have you participate in setting the price of whatever it is you help to produce. That's not your job. That's the job of the employers. The employers are less than 1% of our population, which means that if there's an inflation, it's because 1% of us have decided to raise the prices. There's no other way that can happen. So then the final question is, why would employers be raising prices? And the answer is we teach employers in business schools. Every decision you make as an employer, whether you hire someone or don't, whether you buy a new technology or you don't, whether you move your production, whatever you are, your decision is to be guided by doing whatever, here we go, most advances your profitability. Okay, so the answer to the question, why we have an inflation, is because employers find it profitable to raise prices. That's the story. The rest of it is giving nice explanations. But you notice if you listen here in the United States, what I just said is almost never said. We are told, oh, the inflation is, I don't know, supply chain disruptions. Well, a mystery to me, but anyway, or the war in Ukraine, or or climate change. Stop. So for me, I'm seeing a failure to face what the problems are. I see a failure to cope with them. I see us getting more and more theater as politics, not the practical solution of problems. You know, the last time we had an economic crisis as bad as this one was known as the Great Depression, the 1930s. Now, there were a lot of problems then, too, and they weren't solved. But here's some of the things they did that we're not even talking about. They created, in the midst of the 1930s, they created the Social Security system. We never had that before. You reach the age of 65, and this society is going to say to you, you've given a lifetime of work. You've raised children in a household. You've worked in a factory. You've driven a bus. Whatever you did, you've given a lifetime of labor. We're not going to let you just, die in a ditch someplace. We're going to give you a check once a month. No, it's not a fortune. You'll never be rich off of this, but it'll give you enough to eat. It'll help you if you've had some saving. What a wonderful thing to do just when the government had no money and just when people needed it most. We also passed the first minimum wage in the depths of the Depression. We passed the unemployment compensation system, and we gave 13, 14 million people a public job working for the federal government, giving them a sense of entitlement, and I have an income and I can maintain my rental payments. We really helped people. We're not doing that. We're telling everybody, you're on your own. We're allowing some people to have hundreds of billions of dollars. I saw a television program the other day that showed me the yachts that Bezos and Elon Musk, these are yachts. They look like floating apartment houses, right? So some people don't know where to spend the next weekend, which of their properties, and other people are checking off how much bread they can afford to buy from the day-old shelf in that corner of the supermarket, which is where they have to now go and check. Let me say it in one more way. I don't mean to scare people, but this kind of inequality, this kind of failure to face it, let alone solve it, that's what revolutions are made out of. That's where that comes from. And we are dreaming. If we think as a nation, you can impose this on a vanishing middle class, on a working class, telling them you're not going to have anything anymore. You're going to go, as you put it, backwards historically. And I think you're beginning to see it. All these movements to unionize work, Starbucks and Trader Joe and Amazon, you're beginning to see the demand of working people. I'm not going to be treated this way. And once that gets underway, that's going to be a snowball, very hard to stop.
I want to talk about this. There's a strong dollar right now. We're seeing a lot of expats moving towards Europe. I know you have family in France, right? Spain, France, Germany. A lot of these people are moving over there. And because they can buy with, $200,000, not just one, but maybe two houses. That's why I'm just reading this article the other day. What are you hearing as a person that does have family overseas? Are you hearing a lot of these issues? Do you think it's going to become more prevalent as this crisis gets even worse? Because we're going to see the rise of crime in this country. It's already happening. You're in New York. You see this, but it's happening in every city around the country. What do you think about all these issues?
Well, no. Here's the irony. The money of rich people is coming to the United States. If
Okay.
you are a super wealthy person living in Europe or Asia or Africa, uh, you want to protect your money. As the world is getting more and more riven by warfare, by conflict, you're scared. Your advisor tells you, don't keep all your money here in country X or country Y. You've got to diversify your risk, and the safest place to go where your money is protected is go to New York. Put that money in a big New York or somewhere else in America bank. So the money is coming here, and the way foreign money comes here, they have to change their money from whatever currency they have it in, euros, yen, Chinese yuan, whatever, into dollars. So they buy the dollar, which, drives up its value because everybody who's rich wants it. But now the irony, the movement of people is the other way. Young people in America increasingly I have a neighbor here. He's got a daughter who's about in her late 20s. She's married to a young medical student, just finished. He's a doctor. They're moving to New Zealand. They are so freaked out by life in the United States that they want to go as far away into a whole nother kind of universe. And because he's a doctor, he's got an easy time getting a job, right? A doctor can go anywhere. She'll have a harder time. But I'll give you another example. There are now 25,000 American students going to the university just in Germany alone. Why? Well, the first reason is there is no tuition. Germany, higher education is free, not just for Germans, for anyone. So you can come as an American with your American passport, and you will not be charged a nickel. And you can go through a university system, which between you and me is at least as good as what we have here. Come out with your bachelor's degree, and you don't have to be in debt. You don't have to have that over your head because you didn't have to take care of anything other than your room and your board. That's all. So there's another reason, and these are little straws in the wind. But what we are becoming is really what you said. Rich people are coming here to hunker down and hold on to their wealth. But the working people of this country are upset, are angry. They're sending their young children thousands of miles away for an education. That was unheard of 25 years ago. Foreign students came here, not we went there. These are all straws in the wind. They're showing you that things are getting harder and harder here, and people are going to be looking, in every direction. The subways, New York City has a wonderful system of subways, but the majority of New Yorkers right now are not using them because they're afraid. They're still the cheapest, fastest way to get around, but people are afraid. And by the way, they're not afraid so much of professional criminals. It's not the pickpockets. They're afraid of people who have gone over the edge, if you allow me to say it that way. They're under too much pressure and something snapped and they're not all together with us. And so they can overreact. They hear a loud noise or somebody says something unpleasant and they flip out on you because they're under too much pressure. They don't have a place to live. They don't have a job. They have no help. No one is listening to them. And at a certain point, a human being can't take it.
I got to ask you this question. I was talking to it, and I have about 3 questions left after this. I was talking to an economist in your city of New York. My question is, he's telling me that he thinks that there's going to be issues with maybe some banks going under, and that this issue is happening now. It could have happened in 2008. We could go back into that if you'd like, but they propped all these banks back up. If they let some of these companies and banks just go bankrupt, we wouldn't have this crisis that we're having now. Do you agree with both of those things that if they did that in 2008, it wouldn't be bad now? And also, what is your opinion on what's going to happen with people that have money in the banks? Are they going to be struggling to get their money back from the FDIC?
Well, let me put it this way. The people who would take it on the chin if the government let those institutions go down the way you say, right? They're not going to let that happen. They are not going. These are the people who are the richest amongst us. They're all the best connected people. They're the corporate executives. They're the people whose cousin or uncle or buddy is the head of the Democratic or Republican Party. They're the ones, they're not going to let this happen. They understand your argument. They don't even necessarily disagree with it, but they're not going to let it happen because they don't want to be the ones that pay the price by having their bank or their corporation go under. So it's the irony that the system produces the, quote, successful people who refuse to allow the system to fix itself. So the irony is the system is in the process of destroying itself by the very ways it organizes its operations, where the wealth ends up, and what the people who have the wealth do. And, you know, I know some of these people. And I can tell you, after 3 drinks, they will tell you something like this. Yeah, I know it can all go down, but I'm not going to let it go down on my watch. I'm not going to let it go down when I got my money in there.
But how are they going to keep propping this up? I mean, I don't understand.
They can't. They know, but Bob, I hate to tell you this. They know that, but they want to keep this game going as long as they can, because what's their option? What are they going to do if they let it fall apart? Look, that's how they go to Washington. They get on their private jet, they fly to Washington, and they say to the president, and it doesn't matter whether he's Republican or Democrat, you know, a Trump clown or a Biden old guy, it doesn't really matter. They tell them always the same story. If you don't prop us up, we'll go down. And then here comes the snarl. And if we go down, we're taking you all with us. In other words, you let Lehman, look, remember that? In September of 2008, they let one of them go down, an old, established investment bank, Lehman Brothers. And we came within this amount of a complete collapse. Everyone says, you want to try that one again? You barely pulled it out, and you only let one go. So if you really want to let all the banks that are busted go, it's over, and you'll be blamed. You, president, you, senator, you'll be blamed. We're not gonna see it. This is a game that'll surprise everybody because it'll go. And then it just will collapse. And everybody for the next 50 years will be scratching their head, trying to answer the old question, how did we let this happen? How were we so blind not to see it building up? This is almost boring, the way it's a repetition.
Right. That's why we need people like you in Congress instead of the schmucks that are in there right now.
Yeah, but you know, people like me who, you know, I don't have to run for office, or I don't have those pressures. But you know, for the frustration for us is we keep writing it, we keep explaining it.
Yeah.
We do everything that's asked of us to make the argument. And then finally we do, and they listen to us and they shrug their shoulders, and then, you know, they go out and have a nice lunch. They're not going to let this stuff in because it disrupts. And when I say to them, you know, if you don't listen to us now, it's only going to get worse. It's like going to a doctor who starts to explain to you that, you know, you got a problem with your liver, and you shut him out. And then he has to say to you, you know, if you don't deal with this now, by the time the liver hurts, it'll be too late. You know, you can't do
I want to be gracious with your time and end with these last two questions. I know you were on Jimmy Dore a couple of weeks back speaking about the French elections, and I know as we
Right.
spoke about earlier, of what's going on there and also what's going on in Latin America. We're seeing a lot of elections there where the progressive candidates are winning. We also have
Absolutely.
an election coming up in Brazil with Luna's running again against the Trumpist
Yeah.
guy in there. We'll just say that. So, can you explain to the viewers right that are listening now about what's going on in France and Latin America? Will that happen here, or is it just impossible? We saw what happened in 2016 and 2020 with I can't say this and put this on YouTube, but the elections of the election of Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders of Hillary Clinton. I got censored when I said that the elections were rigged. The primary elections of 2016 and 2020. So I have to be careful. For everybody listening, the elections were not rigged. Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton won the primaries. Please don't get me censored. The elections were not rigged. But go ahead, go ahead, Professor
Well,
Wolff.
let me try to answer it quickly.
Yeah.
First of all, let me point to an election here in the United States. It's a day old. The people of Kansas had a referendum, and the referendum was about changing the constitution of the state of Kansas so that it would have in it a clause banning abortion. Okay. Kansas is a so-called red state.
Yep.
Trump won it by double digits in the last election, et cetera, et cetera. By a nearly 2-to-1 vote, the people of Kansas rejected the change. In other words, they don't want to have abortion taken away. And the importance of it is that it raises the question, did the Supreme Court, by overturning Roe versus Wade and other things it's been doing, take us one step beyond what the American people will tolerate? Is it a lesson for the right wing? You go this far, you take the next step, we're going to slap you down. Well, it's already happening. The polls in Brazil indicate that Lula will win and that Mr. Bolsonaro, the local Trump clone, is going to lose. Now, he may bring in the army. He may try to do a Trump. He has threatened that. We'll see what he does. But you're right. In other Latin American countries, take, for example, Chile. Not only did they win the election, they are in a massive program rewriting the Constitution. And they're doing things like the rewriting has to be done by a Constitution composed 50% of men and 50% of women. I mean, unheard of demands for including people that have been traditionally excluded. And now let me give you France, because in some ways it's more like the United States. It's a rich, industrialized country. Earlier this year, they had a presidential election in which the sitting president, Emmanuel Macron, was reelected as president. His opponent was the far right-wing Trump of France, a woman named Marine Le Pen. Okay. And everybody said, you see, modern politics is between a centrist like Macron and a right-winger like Le Pen. See, just like in America, you have a centrist like Biden and an extreme right-winger like Trump, or the governor of Florida, whose name I block out all the time.
DeSantis.
Yeah, him. Or him or it or whatever the pronoun is that covers it. Okay, so here we go. After that election, the left wing in France, which everybody pretended wasn't there. The left wing has always been there in France, and it's there now. But it was divided up among about 5 or 6 political parties who bickered with one another, including the Green Party, the Communist Party, the Socialist Party, and others. Okay. And under the leader of the biggest of them, a man named Jean-Luc Mélenchon, which Americans, of course, don't know this guy, but he's been a staple of French politics for 20 years. He, the leader, he achieved what no French left leader had achieved for decades. He brought them all together into one unified left party. And in June, a month and a half ago, were legislative elections. That's when you elect in France the people who sit in the parliament, their Congress. It's a separate election from the presidential. Okay. In that election, the president's party, Mr. Macron, got 38% of the vote. In other words, 2/3 of the French people voted against the man who's a sitting president and who had won the election a few weeks earlier. Whoa. Coming in second with 32% of the vote was Mr. Mélenchon, the leftist. And coming in a distant third, Ms. Le Pen with 17%. In other words, the two big parties struggling in France are the centrist government and the left wing which wants bigger, longer, earlier pensions for people, who wants taxes on the rich, who's very dubious about French participation in the Ukraine war, on and on and on. This is a whole new ball, and the whole politics of Europe is changing because this was a wake-up call. Every country in Europe, the left is now going to try to get itself together to replicate that. If there were an election now, given the polling in France, between the sitting president, Mr. Macron, and the leftist alternative, Mr. Mélenchon, the polls indicate it's too close to call. Mr. Mélenchon is closest to Mr. Bernie Sanders. If you wanted some idea, he's like Bernie Sanders, but he's now sitting on the most dynamic, rapidly growing political force in France. So America's notion that you get in the media here that, we're kicking ass in Ukraine and we're sticking it to the Chinese and this is fantasy. Right. This is the crazy ramblings of people who don't want to face the complexity of a world that is becoming more and more critical. I mean, it's just one last thing, Bob.
Yeah.
Yesterday, Fortune magazine released a special issue. It does this every year. The Fortune 500 biggest global economy. It's called the Fortune 500 Global. So they check and they do a study. What are the 500 biggest corporations? For the first time since Fortune magazine has done this, the United States did not come in first. That is, it didn't have the largest number of these big companies, and it didn't sell total sales from its companies more than any other country. Right. Okay. Who's the country that has now got the most out of the top 500 and has, yes, of course, it's the People's Republic of China. A distant third, Japan. Yeah. But this is a watershed moment. This means 5,000 times more than Mrs. Pelosi's photo op in Taiwan. This is about, on the ground, the dominant country whose big corporations are now the global winners is the People's Republic of China. They had 145 of the top 500. The United States had 124. Not even close.
Professor Richard Wolff, again, rdwolff.com, democracyatwork.info. Professor Wolff, thanks so much for your time. I know you have a new book out. It's behind you, and I appreciate that. I hope people go to the website and check you out.
All right, Bob. Thank you for your program, and it's always a pleasure to talk with you.
All right. Thanks, Professor Wolff.